بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for tuning in tonight, inshallah ta'ala, and we ask Allah that He makes this night a blessed night along with all of the nights of Ramadan, and that inshallah ta'ala He makes us among those who He expiates from the hellfire during this blessed night. My brothers and sisters, tonight we will share some of the most, at least as far as I'm concerned, some of the most important stories in the Quran from verses that are found in the 17th juzu, which is where we've reached, since today was the day of the 17th, and it is in Surah Al-Anbiya, because the juzu starts with this surah, and inside of the Surah Al-Anbiya of course means the surah of the prophets. Now, being the surah of the prophets, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the names of many prophets in this surah, and we will discuss, inshallah ta'ala, 4 of these prophets and the verses pertaining to these 4. Why these 4? Because of a phrase that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we want to be applied to us as well. What does He say? فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ. We answered His call. We answered His dua. We answered His prayer. Imagine if you make a prayer and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers your prayers, what more do we want? What more do we want than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answering our prayers? Wallahi, my brothers and sisters, for all of us, and I can say this definitely for myself, that would be a dream come true if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers our prayers. So the question is, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that He answered the prayers of these 4 prophets, that we're going to mention inshallah ta'ala, what is it that caused them to get their du'as answered? This is the question. So there are 4 prophets, each one of them. Now, there are many other prophets, just so that you know, that are mentioned in Surah Al-Anbiya, that are not necessarily in these 4. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions their stories, etc., and some of the arguments that they use with their people. And even before He introduces the prophets, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself is making an argument for belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, submitting to Him azza wa jal, adhering to what He says and whatnot, and contemplating on the creation, contemplating on reality of life, and all of these grand things. And then He also brings in the argument of prophethood, and He mentions prophet after prophet after prophet and their stories. The reality is, many of the prophets, their stories are simple in their nature. What do we mean by this? Meaning that the prophets, many of these prophets, like we'll see, they called their people, they gave them da'wah, they faced difficulties, and the only way to solve their difficulty was with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they make a dua, they pray, and Allah answers their prayer, and the solution comes. That's really the essence of many stories of the prophets. Many of these prophets, and this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's many prophets that are mentioned, and basically that's the whole premise of a lot of these stories. And I want us to think about this a little bit, because we, in a lot of ways, aren't really different than these prophets in the nature of what it is that we are facing. When we go out in the world, we face difficulties. When we try to be a practicing Muslim, in this day and age, wallah, one of the most difficult things is to be a practicing, believing Muslim. A Muslim with, ideas, principles, morals that are based soundly in Islam. Not in Western or Eastern ideologies or whatever ideologies that people follow these days. We're talking about Islamic-based principles. The Quran says this, the Hadith says this, that's what I'm going to follow. Unfortunately, we have people who try to bend the Quran and the Sunnah into their own type of thinking, to fit then into the mold that they have already pre-established, instead of them taking themselves and submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to what the Prophet ﷺ says in his Sunnah. That's basically the idea. So, going back to these 4 prophets. The first of these prophets is Prophet Nuh, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about him, وَنُوحًا إِذْ نَادَى مِنْ قَبْلُ فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ. And Nuh, when he called from before, meaning before a lot of these prophets, and in fact he's one of the first messenger on earth sent because of the problem that arose, and it says فَنَادَى مِنْ قَبْلُ. He just called from before. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't even say what his dua was, but it just says فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ فَنَجَّيْنَاهُ وَأَهْلَهُ مِنَ الْكَرْبِ الْعَظِيمِ. So we, he called upon us, and so we answered him, and we saved him and his family from al-karb al-azim, the great calamity. Excellent. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not mention his dua. Why? Because it's clear what his dua was. Ya Rabb, save me. Save me and my family. from this big calamity. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to save all of us and our families, Ya Rabbil Alameen, from this calamity that we are facing. Whatever the calamity may be, many people have been suffering health-wise, but many people have been suffering psychologically, suffering economically, financially. Whatever the suffering may be, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to alleviate it from all of us and our families, inshaAllah ta'ala. The reality is, the wording of the dua matters less than the heart and some of these conditions that Allah mentions. And this is why after these 4 prophets, there are 4 things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that actually is the reason why Allah answered their du'as, answered their prayers. So if we do these 4 things, we can inshallah ta'ala be like these 4 prophets. 4 things that got their du'as accepted. So, Nuh is the first one. The next one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the surah, after He says, فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ, is Prophet Ayub alayhi salam, where he says, وَأَيُّوبَ إِذْ نَادَى رَبَّهُ أَنِّي مَسَّنِيَ الضُّرُّ وَأَنْتَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ. He says, Ayub, Prophet Job, when he called upon his Lord, أَنِّي مَسَّنِيَ الضُّرُّ, that I have been touched with evil. And he doesn't say I've been afflicted and look at my calamity, blah, blah. He said I've been touched with evil. Why? Because Ayub alayhi salam was one of those people who realized that Allah had blessed him so much from before, and comparatively his test was not as much as what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed him. And this is reality with all of us. If we look, the moments of health almost always outweigh the moments of sickness. The moments of happiness and good and being, everything is going well, is always more than the problems and the tests that a person faces. It's almost more. And this is why he says, I've been touched. Even though we know he lost his children, all of them. He lost his businesses, his wealth, his land, his property. He lost his health after all of that. And his health began to deteriorate so much so that they had to expel him outside of the city, and he couldn't even stand up because his flesh would fall off of his bones from the disease that he has. Yet still he's saying, I have been touched with evil. وَأَنْتَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ, you are the most merciful. Look at how he's belittling himself. He's belittling his status, he's belittling his own problem, yet he's elevating Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and glorifying Him and exalting Him and saying, Ya Allah, you are the most merciful. And this is one of the best mechanisms for dua, to humble ourselves and to glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if we don't trust that Allah is in fact the most merciful, then why are we calling upon Him? By beseeching Allah by His most beautiful name that you are the most merciful, we are asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He is so powerful, He has control over the entire universe, of course He can help us. And that's what we're beseeching. We're beseeching Allah and His power and His might and His mercy that encompasses all things. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after His dua says, فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ فَكَشَفْنَا مَا بِهِ مِنْ ضُرٍّ. We answered his call and we alleviated his difficulty and all of the harm. وَأَتَيْنَاهُ أَهْلَهُ وَمِثْلَهُم مَّعَهُمْ. And we gave him back his whole family and then double that. He got all the same amount of children and even more back. And he got the wealth back and even double. He passed the test. That's what we have to do, my brothers and sisters. The next prophet that is mentioned in Surah Al-Anbiya was Zakariya إِذْ نَادَى رَبَّهُ. I'm sorry, before that. وَذَنُّونِ إِذْ ذَهَبَ مُغَاضِبًا. وَذَنُّون, this is the one of the noon of the whale, which is obviously Prophet Yunus alayhi salam, where he says, وَذَنُّونِ إِذْ ذَهَبَ مُغَاضِبًا فَظَنَّ أَن لَّن نَّقْدِرَ عَلَيْهِ فَنَادَى فِي الظُّلُمَاتِ أَن لَّا إِلَهَ إِلَّا أَنْتَ سُبْحَانَكَ إِنِّي كُنْتُ مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and remember when Yunus alayhi salam, ذَنُّون, he left in a moment of anger, and he thought that his affair would not become difficult. تقدير هنا من معنى التقليل. فَنَادَى فِي الظُّلُمَاتِ, then he called out in the darkness. The darkness of what? ظُلُمَات, it's plural. The darkness is the darkness of being in the belly of the whale, being under the ocean, and in the darkness of night. 3 darknesses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can still hear him, even though he's that deep down and he's that, he's stuck in a hole, literally so deep, subhanallah. Whatever hole we're in, alhamdulillah, it's nothing like what Yunus alayhi salam was in. And he did not despair, and he called, and he says, La ilaha illa ant. He's calling upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by establishing tawheed, by glorifying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. La ilaha illa ant. Subhanak, glory be to you, exalted you are. Inni kuntu min al-zalimin, I was from the wrongdoers. I admit my mistake. By admitting one's mistake and fault, this is one of the best ways to get our dua accepted. The last prophet, prophet number 4, is Zakariya alayhi salam, where he says, وَزَكَرِيَّ إِذْ نَادَى رَبَّهُ Zakariya when he called out to his Lord. Again, there's this idea of calling out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, رَبِّ لَا تَذَرْنِي فَرْدًا وَأَنْتَ خَيْرُ الْوَارِثِينَ. Oh Allah, do not cause me to be without a progeny. And you are the best of inheritors. Obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will inherit the earth and everything that's on it. We know this. But he's saying he was afraid, and it wasn't just from a dunya point of view like, oh, I want a kid, I want a child. He's 90, he's in his 90s, 92 years old or whatever some of the mufassirin say. He's beyond, he knows, the moment. But what he's afraid of is that he's afraid of death without having a prophet come after him. He was afraid that he was one of the last prophets. And the reason why he was asking for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give him a progeny is so that they can continue the path of da'wah. Look at this. His concern isn't for himself. I mean, once you reach 92, you've lived your whole life, he knows this. We enjoy kids when we're younger. It's very difficult. This is why grandparents, it's very difficult for them to raise young children. He's beyond, he doesn't want a child for a dunya purpose. Now, if a person wants a child, this is not a bad thing. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. But I'm saying he has a higher goal. And that's what we should try to embody. Yes, we have these worldly desires that we, it's very natural to want to have children. Yes, and this is great. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us all with good, righteous children and grant us more children if we want them. But what we're saying here is that the want of children is universal. How do we separate ourselves as believers in Allah, as Muslims from the rest of mankind? Is by having a higher purpose for these children. That they call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they do good on this earth. That is what we want. And that's what he was afraid of. وَأَنْتَ خَيْرُ الْوَارِثِينَ. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ وَوَهَبْنَا لَهُ يَحْيَى وَأَصْلَحْنَا لَهُ زَوْجَهُ. He says, فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ. We answered his call, and we gifted him Yahya from ourselves, and we fixed for him his spouse. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after he mentions Zakariya alayhi salam and what he gave him, he mentions the four things that caused Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to answer all of these prayers. Remember, all of these prophets so far that we've mentioned, Prophet Nuh, Prophet Ayub, Prophet Yunus, Prophet Zakariya, and many other prophets. These are just examples, and we're using them as examples because of that phrase, فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ, because it appears only 4 times in this surah. It appears other times in other surahs as well. But we're talking about this specific surah. What are the 4 things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions? إِنَّهُمْ كَانُوا يُسَارِعُونَ فِي الْخَيْرَاتِ. They used to hasten. They were quick to do good. They were taking the initiatives. They were proactive. That's why we answered their dua. Imagine if the adhan is made. The adhan is made. And you're living in a country, in a place where the adhan is made outdoors, and you can answer the adhan and you can go to the masjid. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring that soon. You answer the adhan. You go to the, you know what I mean? So the adhan is made. A person answers the adhan and goes as soon as he hears it. Very good. And another person, he hears the adhan and is like, I'll pray later. I don't have to pray right now. He doesn't answer the call. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here, he's saying, يُسَارِعُونَ فِي الْخِيرَاتِ. They hasten to do good. They're taking the initiative. If the person is not answering Allah's call to the adhan, why would he assume that Allah will answer his call? Yes, Allah listens to it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts it in his own way. But he might not answer it in the way that you want or in the way that's best for you. And this is why if we want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to answer our prayers, we have to answer his call as well. And Allah's call is not just for the 5 daily prayers. Allah calls us to do so much. There are so many avenues of good, and we have to take advantage of each one of those avenues. There's an avenue of good in donating, supporting a good cause, supporting the masjid. Yesterday we had our fundraiser here, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless everyone who donated and everyone who gave generously, inshallah ta'ala. But the call is still on. We still need your support, and we still need your help. Answer that call, inshallah ta'ala. And wallahi, trust me, Allah will answer your call. That's how it works. This is exactly what he's saying. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so generous that he will answer the calls of people who aren't even quick to answer his own call. In fact, he answered shaitan's call. He answered shaitan's dua, which is an amazing thing. Wallahi, my mind, subhanallah, sometimes, when I think about that. If shaitan called upon Allah and says, قَالَ أَنظِرْنِي إِلَى يَوْمِ يُبْعَثُونَ قَالَ إِنَّكَ مِنَ الْمُنظَرِينَ. Oh Allah, give me respite until the day of resurrection. He says, you are given respite. Meaning you're going to live until the day of judgment. Long life. Wow. He answered his dua. Of course, there's a wisdom in why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him this. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already knows. He has that, comprehensive knowledge of all things. What we're saying is that we should be quick to do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks of us if we want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do what we ask of Him. And it's not a tit for tat. It's not a back and forth transaction, because we can, in reality, we're doing so little compared to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala truly deserves. Wallah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have mercy upon us. He says, إِنَّهُمْ كَانُوا يُسَارِعُونَ فِي الْخَيْرَاتِ. They used to be quick. They used to hasten to do good. Okay, that's characteristic number one. Then he says, وَيَدْعُونَنَا رَغَبًا وَرَهَبًا. And they call upon us, رَغَبًا, out of a want, out of hope, وَرَهَبًا, and out of a fear, out of caution. What does this mean? That means that when we make our du'as are either asking Allah for some good or asking Allah to protect us from some sort of evil. It's one of two du'as. And you know what I mean? If you look at all of the du'as that we've been doing even during this month in this series, and if you look at the du'as of the prophets, they're either asking Allah to alleviate some sort of difficulty or to bring about some sort of good. To protect them from some harm or to bring about something that's beneficial. To protect them from the hellfire and to gain Jannah, inshallah ta'ala. That's the essence of all of our du'as. And this is why the hellfire itself is the embodiment of all evil. And this is why Jannah itself is the embodiment of all good that a person can get. Okay? This is why he says they call upon us out of hope and also fear. Because if we're not good with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we could end up going to the hellfire. If we're not good with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we might miss out on Jannah. So there's that element of fear. I don't want to miss out. I don't want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be angry with me. And at the same time, there's that element of hope. I want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know what I mean, to love me. I love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of the things that He has given me. He's given me this life. You know, who I am, my personality, my mind, my body, all of these things. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to continue to bless all of the blessings that we have, inshallah ta'ala. So we call upon Allah out of a want for some good and out of also a fear from some evil that should befall us. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring us everything that is good for us in this life and in the next, and to protect us from any evil that is evil for us in this life and the next, inshallah ta'ala. And then the last thing, so those are the two things, those are the two elements. So these are attitudes. Meaning that when we make the dua, we have these in our attitudes. We're hastening to do good. So that's number one. And this is number two and number three. And number four is وَكَانُوا لَنَا خَاشِعِينَ. And they were to us khashi'in. Khashi'in, of course, we usually translate as focus in salah and whatnot. But here, it's not talking about salah. It's talking about a mentality as well. It's a mindset. Al-khushu' bima'na al-khudu' lillahi ta'ala. أن يذل الإنسان نفسه أمام ربه عز وجل. That the person humbles themselves in front of their Lord. Khashi'in here means we're humble. We know our place. I know who I am. I'm not this arrogant individual. I shouldn't be this arrogant individual. And that I know that I am created from dust, which is the lowest of the low. And in fact, this is why the closest that we are is when we bow our heads on the ground, and we are the lowest of the low at that point. Yet because we're embodying in that moment who we are and our situation, our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we ask upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during that moment to elevate our ranks with Him. And He does. He elevates the person. This is why the Prophet ﷺ, he says in the hadith, مَا سَجَدَ عَبْدٌ لِلَّهِ سَجْدَ إِلَّا رَفَعَهُ اللَّهُ بِهَا. There's no person who prostrates to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a single prostration, just one sajda, except that Allah elevates him because of that sajda. So it's the opposite. It's contrary to what might seem common belief, but it actually makes sense once you think about it. That when I bow down, I'm actually going up, yes. When I bow down, I'm actually elevating in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why when we make our dua, we have to humble ourselves. That's why if you look, every single one of these prophets had all of these. They used to hasten to do good. They wanted something. When they call upon Allah, it's because they want something from Allah, and they also want a protection from some sort of evil, alleviation of the difficulty, and also bringing about of some good. And they were humble to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They didn't say, I'm a prophet, you're the one who sent me, you're the one this and this, and like they're doing favors to Allah. A'udhu billah. And sometimes we do this. Ya Rab, I finished reading the Quran, you owe me an answered dua. Who are you? Okay, Mesh, you finished reading the Quran, that's great. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you and accept from you. But it shouldn't cause the individual arrogance to where they're making demands like this without having that humility and humbleness. And unfortunately, a person can go to an extreme, even in worship, where they think that their worship is them doing a favor to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wal'a'udhu billah, may Allah protect us. You're not doing a favor to anyone but yourself. You're the one who needs it. And in fact, all of the worship that you do is nothing compared to what Allah is deserving anyways. This does not mean that we should not worship. In fact, we should. We should do what Allah asks us. We should do what the Prophet ﷺ recommends for us. And we'll be good, inshallah ta'ala. We should always humble ourselves and call upon Allah with that humility, saying, Ya Allah, these are the deeds that I have done, and you are worthy of so much more than this. And this is what I am capable of, Ya Allah. I know that I am this weak, sinful, wrong, individual. I have so many shortcomings, I have so many mistakes, but you are the most merciful. And I want you to have mercy upon me during this night. This is the essence of the du'as that these prophets, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala send His peace and blessings upon all of them, inshallah ta'ala. This is the essence of all of their du'as that they made. Read the surah, go through it, inshallah ta'ala. It's a beautiful surah, like we said. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He benefits us from the Quran, that He benefits us from the knowledge that we have, and that we are able to put it into action, inshallah ta'ala. And we ask Allah that He answers all of our du'as just like He answered it for these prophets, that He alleviates the difficulties from us, that He grants us His mercy, inshallah ta'ala, that He grants us this humility, and that we're among the people who race to do good in this life so that they can get the best of this life and the next. بارك الله فيكم جزاكم الله خيرا سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته